Welcome to the March 7th, 2025 episode of The Energy Show. I'm energy journalist Markham Hislop, and today I'm joined by Ed Hurst, who's an energy economist at the University of Houston, and we're going to be talking about Donald Trump and tariffs, but with a twist and a very interesting twist. In fact, a couple of twists. Find them very interesting. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you, Markham. Happy to be here.
Always good to talk to you, but this is going to be, I'm not going to say fun because it's not fun for anybody. But Trump came out with a bunch of exemptions over the last day or two, and most of the goods that are entering in, or that Canada is exporting into the U.S. are now going to be exempt. Like he said, this I think actually it was a staff member who said that all of the goods that are covered by the U.S. Mexico Canada agreement would be exempt. Well, it's almost all of them, right? I mean, he's backtracking already in a big way.
Well, that's an agreement that he negotiated during
Yes,
during his first term.
I think he
Uh,
forgot that.
yeah, well, the the um, uh, as we look at it, his comments today in his press conference were, on agricultural products and how the Canada has some restrictions on the imports of, for example, timber, lumber. And he wants to level the playing field there. So they're obviously products that were not covered by the USMCA, and so that's where he's focused at this moment. The on again, off again part is obviously volatile. It's causing a bunch of problems for companies. Those in supply chain management here in Houston have been working 16-hour days since the election. Houston is, of course, not just a hub for energy, but for all seaborne imports, basically for the mid-continent region. So,
Sure.
behind Long Beach, we're the largest port handling imports and exports. So everything coming and going across the borders, everything from China, obviously that's his target with you on the Panama Canal. And the first quarter earnings for these companies are going to take a huge hit because they don't know, and they've been maneuvering manufacturing and people, but there's no way that they can move hundreds of millions of dollars of capital equipment across borders and set up manufacturing in the U.S. They don't even have the trained workforce to do that.
I want to say we're going to talk about tariffs. Then you sent me a clip from Ronald Reagan, 1987, talking about tariffs, and he mentions Canada because they were negotiating the free trade agreement at that time. I remember that very well. And then we're going to talk about Project 2025 and corporations, and that's going to be very interesting. But to talk about tariffs. Let's talk about some of the people inside the administration, like cabinet members who are implementing some of the well, I'm almost reluctant to call them ideas, but Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, came out with some extraordinarily silly comments. If he was in your Econ 10 class, he would fail.
Well, obviously he didn't take it.
Yes.
I mean, when he was first nominated to be Commerce Secretary, and he was part of the Trump transition team and down in Mar-a-Lago the entire time, post-election, he stated on several occasions that the U.S. could go back to just funding the government with tariffs, just like it had done in the 19th century. But times are different, and I can't imagine what the tariffs would be on Mexican tomatoes or Canadian maple syrup.
I have an answer to that. I have an answer. Somebody did the
What?
math. It's
What?
220%.
Okay. But to get the government budget balanced, that's not going to be very workable. And so these simplistic, naive statements really don't do anyone, left or right, Republican or Democrat, any credit.
Well, this guy used to be the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, the big investment firm. He comes from Wall Street. He's been around money all his life. I mean, you think he could do basic math, and he must have a degree or two, and probably, took Econ 10 from somebody. But he's not the only one. You mentioned Scott Bessent. Tell us about him.
So Scott is the Treasury Secretary, and he's made the point that we can do tariffs. We'll be able to collect the income. This will help reduce our budget deficit. And of course, that's based on several fallacious assumptions and fallacious arguments, and as a lawyer would say, facts not in evidence. Because first off, assuming the United States consumer keeps buying goods that have gone up 25%, that's your first assumption. And of course, as they've stated, the goal is to reshore American manufacturing. So if that happens, then the collections from the tariffs go down to nothing because you've reshored. But they also want to wipe out the corporate income tax and run everything with tariffs. These are mutually exclusive aspirations. This is akin to magical thinking.
Could you imagine how much a T-shirt would cost if it had to be manufactured in North America, like in the United States?
Oh,
Uh,
yes. Well, we've had that with, say, baseball caps, that you get from your school
oh, and the
bookstore.
manga caps that are made in China.
They're
That's a
20,
delightful irony, I have to say.
25, $35 a pop. And, for my last school reunion, we brought in caps for less than $4 from Bangladesh.
The benefits of trade. Speaking of trade, one of the issues for apparently annexing Canada is that we have a $63 billion trade deficit, or the US does with us. And Trump thinks that somehow that's a subsidy. He's subsidizing Canada. So I found a list today of the top 10 countries with which the US has trade deficits. We're ninth. We're ninth. Top of the list, China, 295 billion. Then Mexico, 172 billion, because Mexico got slapped with the same tariffs we did. But then Vietnam at 124 billion, and Ireland at 87 billion, and Germany at 85, on and on. Why not? If the U.S. is subsidizing Canada, it only stands to reason that everybody on that list is also getting subsidized and should. But of course, and the reason I bring this up, Ed, is because my hypothesis is that the Trump administration is too dumb to run a trade war. They're just incompetent. And all of this back and forth, and we're going to extend it for another month, and then, I mean, does that not prove my point?
Well, there are a couple of things that you need to add to this discussion.
Oh,
And first off, like I said, the first quarter earnings are going to be miserable, and the warning should start coming out now from the major companies. This is going to knock the legs out from under the stock market, which had increased. The S&P 500 was up 55% from the Russian bear market, if you will, of 2022 without a correction, without going back into a bear market. We're on our way. The Treasury Secretary pointed to lower yields on bonds today as a sign of economic strength. No, that's not the case. This is a sign of economic terror going across the markets. And then and as you go through the discussion of the current account trade deficit, keep in mind that if we're buying more from Canada than Canada's buying from us. So what does Canada do with those dollars? So you can't really spend it well, I guess you could in Toronto or with some merchants who will accept dollars back and forth. But other nations, that's hundreds of billions of dollars that go out from the US to buy goods. And a lot of those come back in terms of net foreign investment into the United States, which I think for last year was 170 plus billion dollars. Once the tariffs go into place, that flow is going to be reduced, if not stop altogether. That's going to cause a drop in the market. And if you kind of think of it, net foreign investment is kind of the air that keeps the balloon inflated over time, and it's the fresh air.
One of the things about the trade deficit that Trump conveniently forgets, because really in his mind it's 200 billion, it's not 63 billion, because what he forgets is that the US has a huge trade surplus in services. Yes, it has a trade deficit in manufactured goods because starting in the 1980s, a lot of the manufacturing shifted to China and then to other places like Bangladesh and Pakistan, where you get T-shirts and so on made. And but in terms of high value services, the U.S. it dominates the global economy, and so putting tariffs on, and then those countries like Canada and Mexico will then tariff the services where they have a surplus, which makes absolutely no sense to me.
Well, and Canada has an additional lever, if you will, and it's the essentially surplus electricity that the Canadian provinces sell down to the United States and the New England states, and then through the mid-continent,
Oh,
right into Trump country. There's nothing to prevent Canada from withdrawing from those agreements, taking that surplus electricity and marking it to the data centers that are burgeoning across the United States. I mean, data is data. I don't know how you're going to be able to tax a kilobyte or a megabyte of data going across a border, but I guess that could happen. But the whole point of trade is competitive advantage and comparative advantage. The nations do what they do best.
I have to point out that Ontario Premier Doug Ford threatened, and he was very adamant about it because remember that Ford is often considered a Trump ally in Canada, but he's become a big part of Team Canada. I mean, that's Canada's largest economy, right? And so that's the home of Canada's automotive sector. So he must play nice. And what he's done is he said, as of Monday, we're going to slap a 25% export tariff on electricity exports to the northeast of the United States. And if you respond, we'll double them. Man, that's tough talk. And I can imagine there are a lot of folks in New England and New York that are a little nervous today.
Well, Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont came out right after Trump's speech, essentially begging for the president to drop this trade war as fast as possible. Connecticut has its own internal issues, but it's also has the most expensive electricity in the New England states. And this is due, of course, to the state's policies over the last several decades. They didn't want new gas pipelines. They didn't want to import electricity from Long Island. They're part of ISO New England, which has been really slow to bring down more power lines from Canada. They closed Connecticut Yankee nuclear power plant. They've done a bailout for the Millstone nuclear power station. And then because they rely on natural gas to top off their electricity supplies during the day, and they don't have enough in terms of pipeline capacity, they rely on imported LNG to drive their grid. So, losing the Canadian electricity or
Wow.
having the price of that increase 25% or even more is going to hit those states pretty hard.
We're going to pause now, and we're going to play that Ronald Reagan video clip. It's a couple of minutes, so stay with us, folks. I think you're going to enjoy this. I wasn't a big Ronnie fan back in the day because I bought my first house in 1984 at 19.5%. And I think everybody at that time saw Reagan and Thatcher as driving the increase in interest rates. So I was a little
Now,
annoyed with him at the time. But
keep in
let's
keep in mind that was Carter. Carter's the one who appointed Volcker to break the back of inflation with high interest rates, and that's of course why Carter lost the election to Ronald Reagan.
okay. Well, let's pause for the clip.
Now, that message of free trade is one I conveyed to Canada's leaders a few weeks ago, and it was warmly received there. Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. Now, there are sound historical reasons for this. For those of us who lived through the Great Depression, the memory of the suffering it caused is deep and searing. And today, many economic analysts and historians argue that high tariff legislation passed back in that period, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, greatly deepened the Depression and prevented economic recovery. You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity.
Now, here's the part of this interview that I've really been looking forward to, because I read a very, very interesting column by Adrian Wooldridge, who is the Bloomberg Opinion global business columnist, and it's called MAGA Wants to End Capitalism as We Know It. And the subhead, its goal is to eject the managerial corporation from its central role in the heart of the U.S. economy. That sounds kind of milquetoast-ish, doesn't mean a whole lot. So, but this is really consequential. So, Ed, explain for everyone, including myself, what a managerial corporation is.
Well, that's essentially what the firm has become. In the days of Adam Smith, most businesses were run by the baker, the butcher, the livery stable operator. Maybe there were a couple of lawyers working together. And then as we learned through the Industrial Revolution, the ability to apply capital to larger workforces, we obtain economies of scale. And so it became less expensive to make things. It became less expensive to farm. And we continued with this aggregation of capital. And as many would say, as Marx would say, the exploitation of labor to operate this capital. And it's very difficult in an agrarian society to accumulate enough capital to operate at scale. And so over the last 150 years, especially in the United States, operating under English common law, where there are a lot of protections for investors, the capital markets have flourished. And somebody like Ford Motor Company, which the family still has a big, significant ownership position in it, but it's not a majority position.
It doesn't do a lot of it doesn't run the day-to-day operations.
It depends. There is a family member, I think, who's in the executive suite. If he's not the CEO, I haven't kept up. But Boeing, General Dynamics, Citibank, the Trump Organization, for it, it's a big corporate entity that provides all sorts of protections to the shareholders, the bondholders, and it's not just one person's capital at risk. It's a lot of people's capital at risk.
So the point is that we now have these very large corporations that are run by a managerial class. This is the key point that Wooldridge makes. And the Trump team and the advisors behind it. And one of these key advisors is Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation and the principal author of Project 2025, right? This very controversial. It's been controversial mostly for its socially conservative bent. Women should stay home and raise children and that sort of thing. But on the issue of industry and on government, it's equally as controversial in my opinion. So the point that Waldridge makes is that they want the Trump administration basically declare war on the managerial class. So the MBAs and the accountants and the, whoever, and so on, who run these companies, the CEOs and their vice presidents and what have you. And that's what they want to do is return to the day when corporations were run by founders or their families. And it made perfect sense to me why Elon Musk is doing what he's doing inside government, why he and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and other billionaires were standing behind Trump, because those are the new heroes of business for the Trump administration.
Well, that's part of the ethos of the tech bros on the West Coast, and especially those who've been extraordinarily successful. They have theirs, and they intend to keep it. That's unworkable, but fragmenting U.S. corporate society, the social fabric, the Fortune 500 into the family 500. That's akin to Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, where big steel firms were broken up and folks wound up doing smelters in the school playground or something. Certainly, it keeps a lot of people employed, no question about it. But the ability to do things at scale keeps the standard of living up. We're not going to go back to small petroleum refineries. To do these at scale, we need 500,000 barrels a day going through them, and that is much more than any Rockefeller family wants to do. And just one more little observation on that. It's kind of interesting how this anti-corporate positioning aligns with the far left green movement's degrowth. They want to reduce carbon emissions by degrowth. In other words, let's stop doing what we're doing. Not just work 4 days a week, maybe only work 3 days a week, and reduce the use of fuel. This is all really counterproductive. We've got about 3 billion people that are going to join us on this planet in the next 50 years, mainly because we brought 21st century energy to Africa and to subcontinent Asia. This is going to be fantastic growth. They're not all going to get a Ford F-150, but they're all going to want healthcare. They're all going to want iPhones. These are technological advantages that the U.S. and Canada and Mexico have. We need to be out in front of this. And I don't see that Project 2025 initiative as a sustainable approach.
I'll tell it's kind of back a return to robber baron kind of capitalism, right? The Rockefellers and the Carnegies and
it's Professor James K. Galbraith at the LBJ School at the University of Texas in Austin wrote a book in 2008 called The Predator State. His father, James Kenneth Galbraith,
a good
wrote
Canadian,
the book,
by the way.
wrote the book, The New Industrial State. And he and his son had talked about the evolution of society in America and how the corporate interest were co-opting governments, local, federal, for their own benefits. And in the 70s, we called this regulatory capture. And in Eisenhower's farewell speech, he talked about the military industrial complex and the interdependency and the capture there. Well, now it's the concentration of wealth in the top 0.5%, really buying access to government. And ever since the Citizens United decision by the U.S. Supreme Court that essentially equated wealth with free speech, The U.S. has been running down this road of the one with the biggest wallet has the largest voice.
I want to talk about Elon Musk because he's been put in charge of this DOGE, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And when I was reading the introduction to Project 2025, which is written by Kevin Roberts, uh, it all became very clear. The idea that the managerial class in the corporate side that these folks really dislike, they see it intertwined with the class that runs government, the administrative class. And so one of the things that Roberts had in his forward, he had four broad fronts that will decide America's future. Number two is dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Dismantle the administrative state, which is essentially the institutions that support modern democracy, support the modern government, and all we do, like regulators and inspectors and all of that infrastructure that supports that. They want to do away with it. And so all of a sudden now, what Elon Musk is doing in his little band of coders who just go in the computer and delete people's jobs, it all makes perfect sense. And in the energy world and in the trade world, you can see how now all of the institutions that support those flow of trade, flow of goods back and forth between the countries, how would you ever do it? Who will collect the tariffs if there aren't any custom agents? They've all been laid off by DOGE.
Again, it's not been very well considered, and
You're being kind.
the aspirations are not lining up with the realities. I mean, unfortunately, the Starship exploded again today, and I guess the market value of Tesla is off 30-40% in the last month and a half. It's the president watches the market performance, I think, more closely than he watches the polls, and uncertainty, increased risk, and just the notion that we're going to be breaking these corporations up into smaller and smaller units. We're going to lose our competitive advantage. We're going to lose our comparative advantage. And we don't have to look too far beyond just the internal workings of the different states. Connecticut, for example, as we talked about earlier with electricity, is essentially an island, and an island state, very much like Hawaii. Hawaii has to import oil and LNG to power the islands. It doesn't have any natural resources. Well, Connecticut has done a fine job of making sure there are no new natural gas pipelines brought to the state. There are no new power lines brought to the state, and yet they complain about the cost of electricity. So, there are some challenges here that the simplistic, naive policy recommendations, which may sound good at a soundbite, will never address appropriately.
One of the things I found in the energy world, like in the oil and gas world, and you know it well, you've been around it for decades, is that very smart people who run these corporations, the CEOs, the C-suite, it hold some very suspect ideas that aren't based in data and evidence or any kind of theory that makes any sense. They're very ideological. So I understand why they come with this ideological agenda. And one of the ideas that they really grabbed onto is this idea of the deep state. I think it was Steve Bannon that introduced that idea. And in their heads, like nobody understand what is the deep state. This makes no sense. We never talked about government in the form of deep state. It's basically the administration that runs government. The very people that Elon Musk is going after are they populate this deep state that exists beyond changes in administration. Another reason why you would want to get rid of all these jobs and destroy the institutions, the departments, the agencies, and so on. And what do we do? What did the Americans do then to restore their economic competitiveness if they have a government that's as misguided as this one?
Well, it's going to have to happen at the ballot box. I think, the midterm elections are well in everybody's view right now. Republican congressmen, Republican senators are scared to death of a failing economy right now. If the market drops by 40% in the next 6 months, the rallying cry, regardless of social issues, regardless of religious issues, regardless of anything, is going to be, it's the economy, stupid. And the incumbent, the control of the House and control of the Senate, that's going to be very difficult. We've already seen the U.S. Supreme Court push back on several things that the Trump administration has tried to do, basically stating you can't do that. That's not in compliance with the law. But as we've seen, the respect for the rule of law by this administration is really quite low. It's going to be a very difficult time for America institutionally.
We had early on in the show about a month and a half ago, we had Dr. Kristen Van de Biesenbos, who's at California State Law School, something like, anyway, professor of law. And her point was that Trump is expanding the executive powers, and he's moving in ways that the founders of the Constitution, writers of the Constitution had anticipated. So the question will be, if the checks and balances hold, does the judiciary, can it act as a brake on these changes? Can the Congress act as a brake on these changes? And she said, if they hold, democracy will be okay. The country will recover. If not, so what's your take on whether those checks and balances are holding now and likely to hold throughout the 4 years that Trump is president?
Well, Congress has not proven to be anything but acquiescent at the moment. We'll have to see with the specter of the midterms looming if there's any pushback whatsoever. The courts, have the ability to rein in some of these policy decisions. They have on several occasions lately, and they've also let some of the initiatives stand. I think it's too early to tell. I think they're going to have to rely on the laws, the acts passed by Congress, approved, even during the prior Trump administration, to basically keep people playing by the rules. If there are areas where there are no rules, then that's going to be up to Congress to apply rules. And I think what we're seeing with the Project 2025 people and this flurry of activity that has come out in the first couple of months of the Trump administration is really an application of AI to the Federal Registry, which is a massive amount of laws, rules, regulations. And now we can compile it all and ask simple questions and get some simple answers. AIs are really just data tools for now. But it's unprecedented with the amount of activity that's been coming out of the Trump White House. Maybe this is going to be the way we go forward.
That's actually a really interesting point because, of course, Elon Musk owns an AI company, and Grok, Grok, for those who aren't familiar with Twitter, or X as he's renamed it. But that's the way the Trump administration is being run is as if Grok was running it. And of course, AI is inaccurate and hallucinates, and it's not a perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But we want to wrap this up, Ed, by concluding, and I think the evidence is fairly clear. This is not a competent government. And we've seen this in Canada. I argue all the time in Alberta, which has a very very MAGA-friendly government in the United Conservative Party under Premier Danielle Smith. is it's not just the ideology, it's the competence. Like they can't even get government orders right. There's scams and all sorts of uh, things going on now that are just coming out that demonstrate this is not a political party that is competent at running the machinery of government. And I would
Well,
argue that it's exactly the same as the Trump administration. And so all of these tariff wars, the trade wars, are going to go very poorly for the US because their opponents, and Canada would be one of those, I guess, are going to be a lot better at it.
yeah, it's going to be difficult. Yeah, I don't think the Trump administration reflects the full will, if you will, of the Republican Party or the central majority of the nation. The folks who are implementing the Doge are um, uh, competent perhaps in their computer programming abilities, but they don't have the experience or the perspective of, say, a large turnaround firm or a very experienced consulting group that would come in and perhaps change everything about your corporation. Um, the push to eliminate employees, which Mr. Musk did with Tesla, with X, with Twitter. All he wound up with actually was the folks who couldn't leave, who couldn't be fired, those who were here with the H-1B visas, and they were working and sleeping on the floor. There are some real challenges to this, and there's a reason that in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the American style of management became institutionalized. Trump himself is attended Fordham, a school very respected for business acumen, graduated from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. These folks are not dummies, but as the Prime Minister said, doing some dumb things.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau actually said that publicly. He said, I think the quote is, Donald, this is a really stupid thing to do. And he's right. Ed, thank you very much as always. I'm sure we'll have you back on because this issue is not going away. It's going to be a long 4 years. Thank you very much for this.
My pleasure, Markham.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.